Hey everyone, I'm Andrew Rowe with Next Generation Equipment Training. Thanks for joining us for maximizing bulldozer efficiency. We're joined here by Gary James, our Chief Instructor, Danny Ruckel, and Nate Montez. And this evening we'll be going through some tips and tricks for operating bulldozers. Next Generation Equipment Training is an organization started in late 2019. We specialize in helping folks learn how to operate heavy equipment in a safe and efficient manner using our simulators. So Gary's going to be walking us through some of the things he does on an everyday basis tonight. Gary?
Thank you, sir. Okay, before we get started, like we do on every live event or any day we're going to operate, before we move this piece of equipment, we have done our pre-inspection or our walk around as we call it here at Next Gen. So I have completely inspected from front to back this machine, and I'm going to stay on this topic for just a moment. While inspecting this machine, we are not going to simply check the oil or fluids in this machine. We want to check this machine front to back. All of our blade pivot points, our track rollers, our tracks themselves, making sure that they are tight or have the tracks slack in the right position is very important with the life and the life expectancy of our dozer. As far as the undercarriage goes, I would say the tracks are the most important thing to inspect on these machines every single day. So now we're going to fire the machine up if we've done our pre-inspection. Get it running. Now that we've finished our pre-inspection and we have started our machine, we are not going to immediately just get to work on this machine. At the end of this session, we're going to show how to shut the machine down and have it enough time to idle down and cool. And the exact opposite is happening right now. We're in Colorado. It's snowing today. So whether it's snowing or not, I'm going to allow this machine to come up to temperature. I want to see my gauges move a little bit. They don't have to come all the way to the center of the gauge pod, the temperature or the fluids wise. We just want to see some movement on the gauge, letting us know that the temperature is rising and we're ready to go. So now that we have waited long enough in the pretend world to move our machine, the number one thing we're going to do before we move this machine and get to work is check the functions of the machine. So I'm going to raise my blade. I'm going to angle my blade both ways, make sure I have free range of motion. And I'm going to swivel my blade both ways to make sure I have full range of motion. That way, nothing is binding, nothing sounds bad, everything is moving how it's supposed to. Okay, so we're going to go through a lot of topics today, and I'm going to move through some of them fast, and we're going to move through some of them a little bit slower as they're more important in my mind. The first thing we're going to go through is working in the slot. This, whether I'm finished grading, filling a road with base, or just bulking out material, I use this scenario, I'd say 80% of my pushing or my operating in the bulldozer. What it's going to do, and I'll show you in just a second after I explain it, but when we start to push a slot is what we call it, and I'm going to stay in the same path or cow path, sheep path, whatever you want to call it. In Florida, we call it a cow path. What it means is I'm going to pick an area, and in this scenario, I'm going to do it right down the center of this road. I'm going to doze all the way to the back, come all the way to the beginning, and just do this over and over again. And what it's going to allow me to do after about 3 or 4 passes is carry more material than I would have not having windrows, sides, or walls. So I'm going to put this into motion. Idle the machine all the way up. Take my parking brake off. And I'm going to slide over, like we talked about, to the center of this area. Perfect. Now, one other point before I get to start pushing here. I've been doing this for 20 some odd years. There is absolutely no reason, whether it's your first push or your last push, to be pushing anywhere above, let's say, second gear. The faster I push, the more wear and tear I'm going to create on this bulldozer or the machine that I'm running. We have to know the limits of our machine, so I don't want to over push or gather more material than this machine can handle. The worst thing I can do when I'm slot dozing is sit and let my tracks rotate. That's going to overheat my transmission or my torque converter, depending on how old or new the machine is, as well as wear my track pads out. So I'm going to put this into motion. I'm on 1.3 as far as speed goes right now. And I'm going to turn my GPS on so you can kind of see what I've got going as far as grade. Another point, while I'm gonna take at least 2 or 3 passes here to create this slot. You might notice that I'm not going all the way down to my final grade in one pass. I'm going to take inches off at a time and push it all the way to the back, and then back up and do the exact same thing. The one thing we do not want to do is fill the blade within the first couple of feet, and this is only for this scenario. I'm going to completely change my, my operation here in just a moment. But for slot dozing, I'd like to show you it full pushes. While I'm backing up, I would like to mention that the area of usage, if you want to call it that, or the length of productivity in my dozer is about 500 feet. So any more than 500 feet, if I'm in charge of this job site, or the foreman or the owner or whoever I might be, whether I need to talk to somebody or make a decision myself, any more than 500 feet of moving this material, and it would interest me as far as production wise and money to get a pan or a scraper or something to move this material farther than 500 feet. This scenario is about a football field or so, so I'm going to do full pushes, like I said, to create this slot dozing technique we talked about. So again, worth mentioning, I brought it up to about second gear in reverse, no more. We do not need to reverse in third gear, it's just wear and tear. And then when I go back into my pushing again, I'm in 1.2 on this particular dozer. So nice and slow, and this is going to allow me to make fine little adjustments as I go through here. The main thing I focus on is not ruining my area of, or my work area, meaning I do not want to create whoopie-doos through this whole work area. Another thing worth mentioning is you're going to see on some of my areas, I have the GPS on. There's a couple areas you're going to notice to where I'm over-excavating or overcutting, and that's in the beginning and the end of this slot I'm pushing. On this particular scenario, I need to create a 3% grade up out of this trench and a 3% grade into the trench. And for myself, in my years of experience, I find it easier to just cut this whole thing out and then use my windrows as I peel my windrows back into my section, or to cover up my slot that I've made as I move more into my production. I can then material and fluff in that material that I've overcut. So I try my hardest to get a full flat plane, even though I might need to grade up 3% or down 3%. I'm just going to excavate this area to very close to grade, and very close to grade, I mean 1/10. So I want to stay a little bit fat. Everything is still blue. The other thing I'm doing while I'm slot dozing, and this is for excavating more or less, is every time I go through here, as I'm scraping my way down to grade, I'm compacting. So even though this is natural ground, and if it wasn't natural ground, that's exactly why I'm bringing up this topic. If you need to compact, or you're filling in with road base, the opposite of what I'm doing, cutting right now. So if we're filling, we want to use the full length of our area to move over a little bit back and forth. Now, while I'm slot dozing, like we talked about, I'm going to stay in this exact path the whole time. And what that's going to do, like we said in the beginning, is you'll see in this path, I can bring twice as much material as I was able to carry on the first 2 passes with me on this third pass. So now I'm going to go down really close to grade, and you'll be able to see how much more material I'm able to bring all the way to the end of this site with me, having these 2 windrows on the side to catch my material. So what's happening is, as I'm moving throughout the trench, everything that's trying to spill out on the outsides of the blades has nowhere to go, so it's just curling right out in front of me again, and I'm going to end up at the end of this trench with about 2 blades of dirt versus 1 blade of dirt. So now I'm going to bump my speed up a little bit. I'm not grading, I'm just going up my ramp. And before I back up and move any farther, the other thing you're going to notice is I'm pushing my spoils all the way to the back of my spoil area. What we don't want to do is do 1 or 2 pass and leave it short in the front. Then my 3rd or my 4th pass, I don't want to have to push the full blade that I've gathered and push the dirt that I've moved, or the spoils that I've moved, to the end of my zone. So I want to utilize my spoils zone in reverse, let's call it. So I want to fill the back of it and then start to come towards my working area as we go. Just like if we're excavating and I'm trenching, I want to release that material as far as possible, so as I move back, I have space to create more spoils. So again, in reverse, just bumping the speed up just a little bit. It's worth a mention while I'm in reverse also that most of these new dozers have automatic double speed in reverse or faster gear in reverse. Again, we don't want to go above second gear. It's just extra wear and tear, but we can speed it up just a little bit to get back and reset. So now I'm going to turn it all the way back down again to 1.2. Now, while I'm slot dozing, you can see that the center grade that I've made, I have some reds, I have some blues. It's kind of, the grade is very, very close all the way through here. Just like I talked about, in the end of my slot that I'm dozing, I have overcut just a tad. So as I'm coming through this slot again, I'm going to pick the right side of the bank or the left side of the bank. Now that my bottom is on grade and I don't have to continue to excavate the center, now all I need to do is move the right-hand side of my blade, and that's the side that I'm about to do. So I'm going to move the right side of my blade, let's say about 10% of the blade into my windrow, and I'm going to pivot my blade towards the left. So as I'm gathering my right-hand windrow, it's sliding down the left-hand side of the blade. And with the distance that I've left, this full distance here, under 500 feet, it should fill the entire blade in the length that it takes me to get to the end of this. So before I do this, I need to mention one more thing. As I'm going through this right-hand side windrow with my blade to the left, let's say 10% to the left, just enough to slide the dirt down the blade. I do not, again, you're only using 10% of the edge of the blade here. I do not want to come into this windrow fully, or even a half a blade is way too much. You're going to push the windrow all the way over to the other windrow. I only want to gather enough material to fill my blade through the end of this. So let's put that into motion. So I slid just a little bit over to the right. Coming down into my trench. Now I'm flattening myself back out. I'm going to speed up just a tad. There is a happy medium on speed. Too slow and you'll start to get the track slap. Too fast and you're going to start to not be able to carry your grade. So that happy point is where I'm at right now. I've got the good clicks going on is what I call it. It's a little faster than that click, click, click. I want to go a little bit faster than that so I can't feel my track pads as I go through here. Push it all the way to the back. Back it up. Coming back up to second gear again. On this particular dozer, I have digital speed. So all I did was hit up, 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 and from 1.2 all the way to 2.0. I'm going to bring it all the way back out again. And I'm going to do the exact same thing over and over again. So I hope you can see on the screen the blue and green and red dots. Just that one pass I just did erased half of my overcut area at the end. So again, every time I carry a blade down here, I'm going to release a little bit as I climb up that hill. The other reason I've overcut that area just a tad is moving that material out of the way for my last and final pass, which we're going to get into final grading later, and you'll see how I windrow across this whole site one last time called final grade, and it'll smooth this whole area out. But as we're bulking, I can overcut a little bit, especially at the rear or the exit of my work area, knowing that as I climb the hill, I'm going to lose a little bit of material every time I climb that hill. Almost made a mistake. Again, not second. I'm going back down to 1.2 and then re-engage. The hardest part dozing is going into the trench and coming out of the trench. It's where you're going to have to make the most amount of adjustments with your blade. Now that I'm in the bottom of the trench, I can just try and carry that flat grade again. So I hear my dozer laboring just a little bit, so I'm going to lower my speed to keep my RPMs high. And you can see, hopefully you can see on the screen, again, I'm erasing all these red marks as I go over by windrowing this extra dirt down the blade. Now as I come up, I'm going to release a little bit more. Now I speed up just a little bit to climb the hill. Again, pushing this material all the way to the back of my site, or my spoils area. One last time, second gear coming back. It's worth mentioning while I'm in reverse again and backing up that I do not want to ride my windrows on the way back. I don't want to be half on it, 50-50 on it. All I'm just going to do is fill the undercarriage with dirt on this machine, and I'm going to lose my windrow. I've done this in the field, and I've backed over half and half, so I have my track on the windrow. And if you're only cutting inches, you're going to compact that windrow down to where you've lost your tunnel or your slot here. So one last pass, slowing down. Now this one I'm going to go just a tad faster. And then this one should be very close to greens. Again, on the exit, I'm going to go left just a little bit and erase my reds or my overcut area. All the way to the back. What I find operators doing is a shortcut the most. Two things is third gear in reverse, which we don't want to see. The other thing is the short push. Once I've made it out of my cut area or my working area, I do not want to, and I know I've said this 10 times already, but I want to shove that material all the way to the back. For any reason, if I have to come and work in this area again, I do not want to have to over-excavate that whole back area just to cut a little bit. So I want to move that material as far as possible. So now we're going to get into dozing from front to back or moving backwards. So in this instance, I've cut my slot on purpose. Now we're going to get into the slot, and this is what I would do if this was overly elongated or out of the 200 to 300 feet range, let's say. If I'm having to doze a very long strip, but I'm still under that 500-foot mark, I'm going to do what we call reverse dozing, which is exactly the opposite of what I just showed you. So I'm going to go all the way to the end here, and I'm going to show you how I would work from back to front, if you want to say it like that. The front meaning the first part that I engaged in the beginning, and the back where my spoils are coming out of. So let's start about here. In working back to front, if I was not slot dozing, let's say I have to just cut 6 inches out of this whole area. What I would want to do is not start at the beginning like I did and doze the whole area. What I would want to do is, let's say, drop my blade right here. I'm going to go back down to the 1.2 again for speed. And I'm going to doze this area down to grade. Overcutting just a little bit at the end again. That's on purpose. All the way to the back with the spoils. Now this is the key, is not to back up all the way to the beginning again. It's just to go to where I have a bad grade, I want to call it. So I'm going to back up until I'm in my greens. A little farther. A little farther. Okay, right there. And what I mean by in the greens is I have GPS on my screen right now, so I'm backing up all the way until I've got one little section on grade. So I'm just going to back up just behind it. Again, go back down to 1.2. And I'm going to start my grade on the greens. So now all I have to do is carry my greens with me. I don't have to dig down and find my grade. I just started at grade, and I find this easier than digging a hole and trying to carry that grade. Like we talked about, that the hardest part is getting into the trench. So now that I've created my slot to begin with, I'm able to now doze backwards. So again, going back to my green spots, you'll see me move back farther every time, and that's exactly what we're talking about. So if I start here in the beginning, let's say 20 feet into my work area in reverse is about a blade full. 20, 30, 40 feet, doesn't matter how far. Let's just judge a blade full on how much you're going to penetrate. Then I'm going to reverse all the way back to that zone to where I've got my good grade, carry it again. Reverse again till I've got good grade, carry it again. Reverse again. So we're just literally going to be working our way backwards. So everything in front of us should be on grade. Everything behind us needs to be cut again. The other thing we can do as far as a little bit of a shortcut, dozing front to back, we just talked about. Now, shortcuts is what we're going to cover. So one of the shortcuts is exactly what I just explained, but just going to the right and to the left. So I don't want to grade the stuff behind me yet. It's too far away. So let's start right here. So I've angled myself, penetrating the windrow on the right-hand side, and I'm going to stay pushing, let's say, to 10 degrees to the right out of my slot. So I'm going to push this out of the way. Again, at the end of there, I'm over excavating just a little bit just to move this material out of the way. Bumping my speed up a little bit, go up the ramp. I'm going to back up again. And now here's the key to the shortcuts is I'm going to do the exact same thing on the left side. So what I'm doing is I'm making this into a big Y. So we started with a slot. I went into shortcuts, which is just working my way in reverse. Now, or I'm sorry, dozing front to backwards. So slot first, dozing front to back, which is just working my way backwards as far as grade goes. Now moving into these shortcuts, and it's exactly what I showed you. So I'm going to go to the left, I'm going to peel that up into the pile, and I'm going to go to the right, and I'm going to peel that up into the pile, even though I just did both of those hands backwards. It makes sense to me. So as I go through, exactly like we were working front to backwards, I'm going to do the same thing here. So I'm going to angle myself, let's say 10 degrees to the left. I'm going to angle my blade so it's spitting my material or windrowing my material inwards. We don't want to windrow out of the work area. Slowing my speed down. And you're going to see that I'm cutting down to the blues again. I'm not going for grade on my first pass. The other thing you might notice, if you can see the dots, is every time I windrow this stuff back into the center, I'm erasing those over excavated areas. So as I'm over excavating, I'm just doing that because in my mind, I know I have to bring the material from the beginning all the way through this section so I can lay a little material in there at the end. There's no reason I can't over excavate this area and bring my material through on my final grade and fix this little bit. So we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. I'm going to angle myself about 10 degrees again, back into my windrow. 1.2 on the speed. And just work my blade into that windrow. Again, angling it to the left now since we're cutting on the right. Bringing that windrow or that material into the center of my work area. We don't want to push it out. Speed up a little and come back up the ramp. Speed up just a little bit. Okay, with shortcuts, dozer operators often assume that longer cuts are better. And to be honest with you, when I was a beginner in the industry on a dozer, I thought the dozer was made to just windrow until sun goes down, and that is absolutely incorrect. A dozer blade can only hold a fine little amount of material. If we're not in a slot and we're pushing for long distances, you are literally just digging a trench and moving the material out on both sides of this blade. So in order to move more material than the machine is designed to do, we would need to work in the slot. Now, if we're final grading or we're not pushing bulk material, all of that goes out the window, like I talked about. If we're only cutting inches out of here, I would do a different scenario. Once the blade is full, you're ceased to be able to cut. So once you fill this blade, all I'm doing is carrying what I've put in front of the blade to the end of my trench or my slot. So you have to be mindful, again, as I go to the beginning, if I fill the blade immediately, again, like I talked about as a new operator, what I find myself doing is I dig a hole in the beginning, I fill my blade. By the time I get to the end of this section towards my area of spoils, I've lost everything I just piled in front of the blade. So that's where working backwards comes into play. Long cuts are also a waste of fuel. No matter how big or small the dozer is, it's not made to push long distances. You're just burning extra fuel. you should be able to accumulate a full blade load within 2 tractor lengths. So again, as I come, let's go to the pile. Now I'm going to set my blade down right at the end of the GPS marks. Let's back up. There's 1 dozer. There's 2 dozers. So backing off of my pile, my spoils pile, 2 dozer lengths, look at the section that I should be working. And I want you to pay attention to this as operators. Again, we don't want to back all the way to the front of this section. I can and I will be more productive moving small chunks of this up to my spoils pile, like I talked about. I don't want to move big blades and then lose them before I get to the end of this section. So that is the first 3 topics we're going to cover today. And we like to stop in between after a couple segments and answer any questions or comments, anything that you might have on the top of your head that you need answers to. We also have a panel of professionals, if you want to call them that. So any questions, comments? Andrew, up to you.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, Trey Reynolds, just want to thank you for joining us this evening. If you have any questions, feel free to submit them into the group chat. But I think we're going to hear from Danny on some pro tips here.
Yeah, Gary, is there a maximum depth you can go on a slot cut?
Sorry,
Is
say
there
that
a
again, Dan?
maximum depth you can go when cutting in a slot?
Honestly, unless I answer this incorrectly, I wouldn't go higher than the top of the dozer for safety reasons. Obviously, the deeper I cut, and this is an answer from my operating background, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if there's rules tied to this specifically for slot cutting, but in the real world, I would not cut a slot any deeper. Let's say I cut a slot the width of my bulldozer. It wouldn't be any deeper than the roof of my bulldozer. I would either widen it out, slope it down, or notch it, step it, something like that as far as my safety. But if you'd like to add anything to that, I'd love to hear about it.
I was actually told that you should never cut deeper in your first slot than the top of your blade to prevent wear on your tracks and excess wear on the machine itself.
That is a very good point. And now that you say that, I will say that honestly, unless I widen the slot up, exactly what you're talking about will happen. And I'm glad Danny's here to answer that question more in depth than my knowledge. In Florida, where I come from, the rules are lax or lack thereof. In Colorado, where we are now, it's a little bit different, but exactly what Danny's talking about. If you think about it, as I'm dozing in my slot, some material is still coming around the edges of my blade. And even if it's not, the depth of my trench or the slot that I've cut is definitely going to be sheeting off and coming into my rollers and my tracks, like Danny talked about, premature wear and tear. So that's a very good point. Thanks, Danny. Any other questions before we move on?
No, great. Gary, let's move on.
Okie dokie. Our next topic is working up and down slopes whenever possible. And most of this is going to be talking points. I don't have a slope in the sim for this, but I wanted to talk about this because it's very, very important. I have come from a finished dozer background. I'm used to sitting on 3-to-1s, 4-to-1s, sometimes 2-to-1s, and driving with the slope. If at all possible, like we talked about, and I mean that if all possible, I'd like you to push up and down the slope. One thing in the real world is, and if you're an operator, you'll definitely know what I'm talking about, is it's very, very hard, nearly impossible to get dirt to go uphill if I'm pushing with the slope. So not necessarily beneficial for final grade as far as lake banks go, and that's more or less where my background comes from. But as I start creating my lake banks, I've seen dozer operators windrow for days trying to get material out of the center of the lake or the pond, whatever we're digging. They'll start all the way in the middle of the lake and try and windrow lake banks up if we have to bring them up or if it's a fill. What I hate seeing is exactly that situation. Windrowing, let's say you're moving 10% of the material that you could pushing straight forward. And Danny and Nate, correct me if that sounds wrong, but windrowing, you can only move a certain amount of material. If I'm dozing in a straight line or even slot dozing, myself, I was dropped off with stakes in the ground, blue stakes all the way around, and this is where the lake's going. Most of my lake banks in Florida were fill. So I would just come in the center of my pond, and I'm gonna do exactly this same situation. So take out of consideration my GPS grades and all, and I'm gonna show you exactly how I would do this. So shut this off. Let's say the hill that I have just created with my spoils is going to be the lake bank that we need to create. So instead of windrowing with my pond, I'm going to shove the dirt up the slopes. Let's say this is the top of bank here. So if this was my top of bank grade, I'm going to cut a flat spot. I'm going to back up here. I'm going to move over just a little bit. So essentially what I'm going to create is I'm pushing in the hole, out of the hole, up to the top, creating my berm. One thing I'd like to mention is if you're creating berms or lake banks, anything where you're moving the dirt up in a fill position, you want to, let's say we have to fill this 2 feet at final grade, and that's the top of my bank. You want to put 3 feet of dirt on this area. The one scenario that I've come across a lot, and it kind of makes me mad and I don't do it anymore, I would push all this material up on my lake banks, digging a hole, making my lake banks. I would get it really close to grade, and then I would hop the dozer up on top of this that I've created, and my first pass across this, just my tracks and my weight of my machine alone would compact below grade. Then I have to come all the way back down in here into my tunnels and push more material up. So it would behoove you as a dozer operator to push more material than you think you need up to the top. Always thinking when I climb up on top of this pile or lake bank, and the first dozer push I do is a rough grade, is going to compact. So a couple more motions to show you how I would create this lake bank. And this is just going to be a small piece of a lake bank just to show you an illustration of how we would create this. So if this was my top of bank, I'm going to go a little bit higher. Then I'm going to flatten this puppy off. Let's do one more push so I get a flat spot up there. The other thing I need to create, even though the top of bank might only be 2 feet wide or so, some top of banks I've created are 5 feet wide. This dozer is 11 feet wide. Some dozers are even wider. If you're on a Komatsu, I think they're like 13 feet wide. The blades are a lot longer, the tracks are wider. We always want to create more material up here than I need. I can always carve it down the back side or carve it back down the front side, and I can get it with my excavator. So one more blade up to the top of our lake bank. Again, this is my area that I want my lake bank top to be, so we're going to shear this off, creating a flat spot. And now that I've created my flat spot and my material is up here, all I have to do is pivot, back up, set on the slope, which I'm on, and now I can start to windrow. And I know my material is going to go downhill, but for the sake of carrying my material as long as possible, I want my blade articulated to windrow uphill. Even though it's not going to windrow it uphill, it's holding that material as long as possible before it spits out of my blade. So then we just start our bank. And I'm purposely going to cut this all the way down to the ground so I have a ramp to get up on here. So while I'm up here, I'm going to flatten this little spot. Perfect. Now what we're going to do is go and turn around and come right back up that same ramp I created. And by creating that ramp that I just did on purpose, it's at the same or close to a 4-to-1 angle as I need to grade my slopes. And that's another thing we want to try and think of. If I'm getting on top of my slope and I'm sitting flat, my blade only articulates so far. So if I'm on flat ground, this blade will only go to about a 6-to-1 angle or 20 degrees or so. So I have to get my dozer in the 4-to-1 motion to be able to continue that 4-to-1 as we go around. So I'm going to articulate my blade again, uphill. Come on my slope, wait for the dozer to fall over on my slope. And if I would have worked for a few more hours and pushed more material in front of my area or on my top of bank, now all I just have to do is continue my grade on around here. So on the lake banks or pushing uphill, I want to do all that bulk pushing uphill, and then now you can see that I've set myself up on here, and I'm just going to fine grade this thing. We don't want to use or drive with the slope and try and move bulk material. It's all going in one way, downhill. So I'm going to get down off this puppy, and we're going to move into knowing the limits of the machine, which we've touched on a couple times. I'm going to show you a couple instances of where we're going to push the limits of this machine. So like I told you not to do, I'm going to do this on purpose. We're going to go all the way to the beginning, and I'm going to overfill this blade and show you how tough this is to carry to the end of my sight. I'm going to leave the GPS off. I'm just going to carry a full blade of dirt so you can see. We're not worried about grades. I want to show you how much I can stall this machine out by just carrying a full blade. I'm going down into my trench. I got about a half a blade. Full blade. Machine is laboring and slowing. I have track spin. So you can see from the beginning or the initial engagement I've done, I've only gone 2 lengths of my dozer, just like we talked about earlier. I know I said to only work 2 lengths of my dozer in reverse, but just for illustration purposes, I've only gone 2 lengths into this trench with my dozer. I have a full blade and I'm basically at a stall. So what I'm going to have to do to continue to push through this section is I'm going to have to lift my blade. What's that going to do? It's going to leave material. So myself as a pre-planning operator, I've shown you about a dozen times at the end of this section that I overcut it. I'm going to turn the GPS back on again. I overcut this section in my head, knowing that I'm going to do this. If I do not pre-plan this scenario and I have this back section on grade, what's going to happen when I have to lift the blade here and I'm only halfway through my area? Again, so I've cut it to grade and I filled it back up. You're going to do this over and over and over again, not working yourself in reverse. Okay? You can see I'm on full throttle. I'm in 1.2 and this thing is barely moving. And I'm trying my hardest not to lift my blade up because I don't want to waste this push. So again, that was just for teaching purposes to show you what's going to happen over and over again if you take that long path. All you're going to be doing is flipping your material over and over and over again. And what we don't want to do in civil industry is touch our material more than once, if possible. So you can understand that if I back up 2 lengths and I push this, let's say I'm going to stop right here. I back up 2 dozer lengths. I'm pushing this all the way to my spoils area. Am I going to have to touch that material again? Absolutely not. It is completely out of my working area in the spoils zone. And I'm never going to have to push this again. The only time I'm going to have to fuss with that material again is either to straighten out my spoils pile or to create the slope bank, whatever we're using this material for. So it's very important that we use our 2 dozer lengths and no more to push. And that doesn't mean you have to stay in this slot. We can do two dozer lengths and push this whole grid out to the back of the spoils area and then just move back like we talked about. And I don't like seeing guys do that at all. Like I talked about flipping that material over and over again. You don't realize that you're touching the same dirt over and over again, but you are. You're wasting a lot of fuel and a lot of man hours, and you're going to look a lot better as a dozer operator doing small sections, because at the end of the day, you've moved, let's say, 20–30% more material than you would have doing long pushes. You're going to look better. You're going to be less fatigued as well. I'm not driving long distances. I'm not working this blade for 10 minutes in a row. I'm working it for, let's say, 30 seconds or a minute. then getting rid of my spoils, and then coming back and doing it again. So I'm going to be comfortable as an operator as well, moving in small sections as I go. Now we're going to move into backfilling, and this is a very, very important part with dozing. A lot of dozer operators have not backfilled in their years. Myself as a finished grade operator, I very, very seldom, it would have to be a serious incident to where I get called to the pipe crew to help backfill for those guys, but it has happened. The first mistake I did was not overfilling the area of, or the area over the pipe that I'm going to drive over. Meaning, I want to make sure if there's a pipe in front of me, I want to put a minimum, and I mean this, a minimum of a foot of dirt over this. All those talking points I just referred to of building those lake banks or the berm or top of bank, over producing that material. Remember, as soon as I step down into this pipe trench, I'm going to compact this material. So let's say I put a foot of material over the pipe and I drive this 42,668 pound dozer into that area. It's going to probably press that 1 foot dirt into a 6-inch dirt pad. My track pads, or the cleats on my tracks, if this is a brand new dozer, they're close to 3 or 4 inches tall. So now I'm within 2 inches of my material or my pipe that we've laid in that ditch. That's with 1 foot over the top of this. So this is going to be a quick little talking point, but it's very important. If I'm going into a trench, and I'm going to make a little fake trench here, I'm just going to dig a hole, just flop it on the other side. So let's call that our trench. I'm going to go back here and I'm going to put 2 to 3 feet of material over the top of that area before I introduce any of my weight or my tracks into that area. So just like we did slot dozing, always angling or windrowing into the area, not out of. 1 blade over the top. Now this is an instance to where I am not worried about running over my windrows. I'm merely just coming back and looking for bulk material to shove into this ditch. So let's say we'll do number 2. We'll come over to the right side and they'll fillet it in or windrow it in. Second one. So there's a foot. I'm going to drive in about 50% of the way just to smush just a little bit. And then I'm going to do over and over and over again. So if I have in front of me, let's say in front of me, 20 feet out in front of me is visual pipe in the ground. I definitely want to slope, let's say, and Danny, Nate, correct me if I'm wrong, I want to put like a 6 to 1, 5 to 1 on this bad boy coming down into this trench. So let's say 2 dozer lengths back on my 6 or 5 to 1 slope, I've got 3 feet of material over this pipe area. Good guys with that, those numbers? So as I work my way down, keep that visual pipe or the pipe that is out in the open. I can clearly see it. Let's keep it 2 dozer lengths in front of my dozer. If I keep that 5 to 1 or 6 to 1, and I keep that visual pipe 2 dozer lengths in front of myself, I will maintain 2 to 3 feet of fill on my pipe as I compact my way in. So the only time I'm getting close to that area of disturbance where I can see that pipe in, or see that pipe in the ditch, and I'm also straddling that pipe as well. So as I'm moving forward to it, I keep myself in visual, meaning let's say a dozer length away, press, back up. Let's introduce more fill or more material and press and back up. So we want to keep that the whole time. Okay. Now we're going to move into my favorite part because I don't like bulking material. I like final grading. So let's get into final grades and the tips and tricks with that. Number 1 with final grading, and a lot of operators have different ways of doing things. I'm going to teach you my way. I always windrow 1 way, and I do it the same way over and over again every single day. I picked 10 years ago that the right side of my blade is what I call the grade side. The left side of my blade is what I call the watching side. So if I'm windrowing to the left, what I want to do is grade with the right-hand side of my blade with my up and down movements, just making sure I'm collecting my windrow. With the left side of my blade, that is what I'm watching my grade or my final grade. So as I'm final grading, at the end of the day, what we're going to do right now is, let's just say it's 5 o'clock and we have to clean this area up. We're not done excavating for tomorrow, but I have to safe this area up in a manner to where if it rains or if somebody comes on the job site, it's not an absolute mess. So we have over excavated the center of this. So the only option I have at the moment is to V this in. So I want to do a nice, let's say 6% grade on this side on the right and a 6% grade, and we're just going to valley it down in the middle. So if it rains tonight, it might be full of water, but it's not going to have windrows, potholes, all kinds of stuff all over it. So I might have to just either set a pump in this area or continue a windrow ditch out of here and just drain it. The other thing I can do in the morning, since I V'd in or holding water, is I can squeegee this out is what I call it, which is just get a big pile of dirt in front of me and force the water up and out of this section. So final grading. We have the GPS off. We're not worried about anything other than sightly grade, okay? So again, 1.2, 1.3, I go a little bit faster when I'm final grading. I want my material to slide on my blade just a little bit more. Very little movements with my hands. Once I set my blade, I literally just let her go. I make tiny, tiny little movements, but you don't have to go crazy. All I'm trying to do is get the windrow to go downhill. And this second blade is where it comes in to play my two separate choices of what side of the blade I'm watching as far as the material of the windrow and what side of the blade I'm watching as far as the discharge of my material and the grade I'm leaving at the end. So I just did one pass on that windrow just to get rid of the windrow. So all I did, no angle, I just flat topped that whole section. Now what I'm going to do is go in and do the exact same cut with a little angle down to create my second windrow. So the only thing that is telling me how much material to put in front of my blade is I want material spitting out the left side, and that's going to make me be able to move, or allow me to move over and grab the windrow again. So if I don't spit a windrow out, no matter which way I'm going with the windrow, if I'm not shoveling material out of the windrowing side of my blade, I have to cut more material. Again, we're not grading. I'm not worried about final grade or anything. I'm just smoothing this. I know we called it final grade, but I'm just smoothing this area out for the end of the day. So as long as I'm fluidly spitting material out of my windrow side, we're doing fine. If this is a flat top area, house pads or a building pad, I'm going to do the exact same thing, but I'm obviously not going to be angling the blade into the dirt. My blade will be flat and carrying that grade, but I definitely still want to have material fluidly coming off of that windrowing side of the blade. Without that windrow, I'm not able to reset and move myself down the path again. So I'll speed up a little bit and back up. I'm going to try and speed this up just a little bit. These speeds are not recommended. So pass number 3, in the trench, material coming out of the left side. That's all we're looking for. My right side, all I'm doing is floating the blade over the material that I just left. I'm not cutting at all. The only thing cutting is the windrow, or that block of dirt that I left on purpose, just to keep moving that windrow down. The only way I'm able to continually smooth this area out or make it look like it's smooth is having that windrow or that full blade. If I'm not carrying a full blade, this is very hard to do. So I'm going to do that one more time before I move to this other side, and I'll windrow that in the same way, just the opposite way. Again, left side, material flowing. Right side, in the air. Nothing happening. If I touch, that's okay, but I'm just using it as a guide on the ground. I'm not adjusting the angle of my blade or anything. I'm just up and down. That's all I'm doing right now. So now we've made it from the right-hand side of my working area to what I'm going to call the center or the bottom. Now we're going to articulate our blade and work from the left side down to the bottom just the same. The other thing you're going to notice, even if this is not the end of the day, I'll make a good point. At the end of my excavation or the cutting of this area, I'm going to do this exact same motion. So if I'm still excavating this area, I am not. If this white line is my border of cut, I do not want to go down windrowing in this area. So even if this is not the end of the day, I would use this exact same technique to fold my sides into the center. So I would do this over and over again until I have both edges on grade and a fat windrow in the center now. So what we did earlier in the day was cut the slot. Now at the end of the day, once we've reached our borders, we want to flop this back in and fill the slot. So this is, again, why we were talking about, I'm not worried about those red zones or those overcuts. We're going to flop it back in. So as I'm cutting, I want to windrow this in, and I want to windrow the right side to the left, not over pushing through my boundaries. So that's another thing you're going to notice with newer operators is they just go in here with a straight blade, and you're going to keep filleting this or windrowing this outwards and outwards and outwards. By the time you know it, you have no white lines, and you have no idea where your work area is. So you always want to, if I've excavated the center as much as possible, now we're going to flop our sides in. Again, right side, so the same thing we were doing before, just opposite. The left side, I'm just watching, maintaining natural ground or close to. I have a little bit of material I've grabbed going into the trench. My right side, I just want to see material coming. There we go. Now at the end of this, again, to not bury my line, I'm going to curl back in towards the center as to not bury that line again. If somebody took the time out to chalk or paint these lines out, I want to keep these as long as possible. Same with grade stakes. I don't want to run these things over. I don't want to move my material out to the ends of this site for no reason. We always want to keep it in, don't work out. We're running out of time here, so I'm going to move into the shutdown procedures. So at the end of the day, our entire area is clean. I'm going to bring my dozer out to a nice flat area. Again, I don't want to leave it in my work area. If it rains in there tonight, we've created a pond. So I have a nice high spot right here. Now we're going to go through exactly what we went through in the beginning, but the opposite. Shutdown procedures. We want to let the machine idle. I have allowed my blade, the float mechanism on my blade. So if you don't know, or if you haven't operated a dozer before, the right-hand joystick, if you just shove down in a quick motion, it will relax the hydraulics. I like to park like this every night with any machine that has a float on it, whether it be a front end loader or a dozer. What it does is just relaxes the hydraulics. So if I was to, and this is going to be very hard to see on your screen, if I was to relax the blade or set the blade on the ground like this, and you can see that on your screen, that's a very good picture. If I shut the machine down like this, overnight the hydraulics are going to slowly start to relax and set this blade down on the ground flat. It's not going to hurt anybody, but let's say we've got a little wanderer on the job site, and I see this all the time in Florida. Overnight, people come and they pick shark's teeth out of our job sites. If he's just admiring this bulldozer, or for some odd reason he has his child or somebody climbing on and off of this thing, if you just lean on this blade in 2 or 3 hours, it has a tendency to go ahead and just release and sag. You could have somebody's foot caught under here. Anything could go wrong. You could make stuff up all day long. So allowing it to float and be level is the safest way to park this machine. No other parts are going to move. Parking brake is on. The whole time I've been talking, we're allowing the machine to cool down. This machine, as well as all the other machines we're going to operate, have a turbo on it. So we want to allow the engine oil temperature to come down. And in saying so, Most of my machines do not have an engine oil temperature gauge. They have a water temperature gauge. They have a hydraulic temperature gauge. Very seldom do you see an oil temperature gauge. So I just want to allow this enough time, 5-10 minutes. This is the perfect time to clean my cab, do the housekeeping, maintain our machine, get anything ready for tomorrow that we can get ready for tomorrow to not waste time tomorrow. So now that we've allowed ample time to cool down, we're going to shut our machine off. We're going to get out of the machine. And the other thing we're going to do, if this is a cabbed machine, if your company has blessed you with heat, AC, and glass, we're going to completely secure the cab of this machine. I hate when I come to the job site in the morning and you have a $250,000 brand new Dozer with the bat wings open. There is absolutely no reason to have the doors open on a Dozer overnight, especially during the day. If you have a cab, close the cab. Housekeeping wise, we're not going to leave any trash in here. If I'm not the Dozer operator tomorrow, me coming in for a day to replace you, I don't want to see dip cans, sunflower seeds, water bottles, your leftover gloves with grease all over them. Throw the stuff away. There's a dumpster on every job site. And this is a big machine. There are lots of little stupid things that we can leave in the cab that's going to mess the AC up. There's wires and all fuses and all kinds of stuff. So let's clean this cab just like it's our car, okay? I hope you guys got some knowledge out of these Dozer tips and tricks today, and can't wait till we see you the next time in a couple of weeks on the CAT machine. And if we have any questions, comments, we have a little bit of time for that, and thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Gary. Yeah, so if there's any questions, feel free to just ask them via your microphone or type them into the chat. And I think Nate had a couple words he wanted to share.
Hey, so Gary, just to touch on the housekeeping portion of the end of the day run, I would say make sure your tracks are clean. That's just an important part. You know, we don't want to slip and trip on any mud or rocks or anything like that. Just makes the machine look a lot better too. And I've touched on it before, you know, clean the windows, all that good stuff. You know, you're getting paid to do it. Keep the machine looking nice. These are very expensive, and if they're well maintained, yeah, makes it even better.
That's a very good point. I will tell you that nothing makes me happier, even if we're not moving, nothing makes me happier than coming in the morning as a foreman and seeing my Dozer, my excavators, all with clean tracks looking like we just showed up. That makes me absolutely happy. Furthermore, it is absolutely a lie if you told me you inspected the rollers, the tracks, the pins, everything on here if it's completely plugged with dirt. So like Nate said, let's clean this machine. Housekeeping is what we call it. Let's clean everything. The other thing that's very important to do as far as this machine and GPS goes, not only with GPS, but even without GPS, over excavating, I'll have dirt come over the top of this blade, and I need to clean all that off as well. I can't grease these points. I can't plug in my GPS, put on my rovers with dirt and material all over this blade. So very good points. I hope you guys had fun, and we'll see you on the next one.
Great. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody. We'll see you in 2 weeks on September 23rd, and hopefully you can join us then. Thanks so much.